have to inform you for legal reasons that I am now recording.
I can see the little notification at the top. You're fine.
Just in case you decide to sue me, which you have done before, and I've been bitten once. I don't know.
Literally. I set my
Yeah,
dogs
why
on
did
you.
you do that?
I was Mr. Burns in another life. How am I
No,
going to guard my wealthy estate?
I was thinking more like you would literally bite me. Please don't.
Oh, that's also a thing I do. So it's really up to you. Column A or column B.
I feel like there's going to be a ton to talk about with Chinatown, because it's a big movie and the story is. The worst part is going to be trying to explain the plot, which we do try to do.
Yeah, it is a slowly unraveling. It's
Full of red herrings.
Mm.
Hello and welcome back to Out of the Cast. I'm your host, the Curmudgeon, and this week I am joined by Frankie from Jimdustries. Say hello, Frankie.
Hello.
Or don't say hello, it's up to you. I mean, I guess you've already said hello.
Yeah.
Anyway, this week we're going to be talking about Chinatown, which I am very excited for because Chinatown is not only arguably the best film noir ever made, it's arguably the best film ever made.
It's got to be up there, hasn't it?
It's a respected movie, and there's obviously some kind of contention around it, but we will get to that.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we even start trying to explain the plot of Chinatown?
Would it be worth doing it chronologically?
I guess we could try. So when is it set? I think it's set sometime in the
1930s.
In the 1930s. And you've got a private eye played by Jack Nicholson called Jake Gittes. He's approached by Evelyn Mulwray, quote unquote, who claims that her husband Hollis Mulwray is having an affair, and she wants him to obviously do some investigating to prove it. And so he takes on this case and he ends up doing some investigating. But in the process of his investigation, he discovers that there is some suspicious activities going on in not just Hollis Mulwray's life, but with respect to his job. He is basically a water baron. He co-owned at one point the what would you even call it? It's not like an industry, but like the water industry with a man called Noah Cross. And there are plans to irrigate land in various areas, and there's a plan for a dam to be built, and Hollis Mulwray is absolutely adamant that this dam cannot be built because it could be absolutely fatal to the actual physical structure of the land. So we've got all these red herrings being thrown in about this plot to do with water, this vague plot to do with water that you only vaguely understand to begin with. You know that there's some foul play going on, and you know that he's rubbing some people up the wrong way by trying to block this dam from being built. And lo and behold, Hollis Mulwray is caught in the act of schmaltzing some young woman who we believe to be, that's the operative phrase here, believe to be his mistress. And then all of a sudden, the whole thing takes a wild turn when Hollis Mulwray turns up dead, having been drowned in salt water, and his real wife, the real Evelyn Mulwray, played by Faye Dunaway, shows up and isn't particularly happy about the fact that Jake Gittes has been investigating in her name when she never asked him to. So Evelyn Mulwray is not Evelyn Mulwray, but is someone else entirely, pretending to be Evelyn Mulwray.
Ida... Oh God, what's her name?
Ida Sessions.
Yes.
Played by... What's her name? His name I don't remember. Oh, another famous actress. Who cares? She's not important.
She dies.
She dies anyway. You've got this brilliant setup where there's all this foul play going on. Someone is trying to drag Jake Gittes through the mud by posing as someone that they are not. Hollis Mulwray has been murdered, and we suspect it has something to do with all this business going on in the water department, the city water department. And you've got the highly suspicious femme fatale, quote unquote, in the form of the real Evelyn Mulwray, played by Faye Dunaway. It ends up being a huge conspiracy that may or may not involve the distribution of water in Los Angeles during a drought. And murder and conspiracy. Honestly, that is probably the simplest way to explain the plot of Chinatown, because it ends up being more simple than you think.
I'd say that the politics of it, this whole conflict about whether or not to build this dam and irrigating the land, and the farmers versus the people of California, gives way to just family politics.
Yeah, it's a red herring. It's a total red
Yeah,
herring. You're taken on this
like
adventure.
communism.
Like communism. You are a red herring
Yeah.
because you're a communist. You're taken on this adventure of like, oh, was this man Hollis Mulwray? Was he murdered because he's trying to stop this plan from going through to build a dam that may or may not be detrimental um, to the well-being of Los Angeles, and then it turns out he totally wasn't, and it's something much much more kind of intimate
Mm,
and horrible. But we will get to that. I think basically speaking, that is as simple as one can package the plot of Chinatown.
yeah.
We'll end up probably getting into the intricacies of it as we go. But let's start with a broad question. What do you think makes Chinatown a great film noir?
I think part of it has got to be the perspective you're given. I think at every turn you are what we see is blinkered insofar as you only see what Jake understands and as he's learning what's going on.
Yeah,
And it kind of it unravels with his knowledge. So you have just his perspective of the real Evelyn Mulwray, for example. We are encouraged to see her as the audience as this femme fatale at one point, to this kind of very hard done by widow, under the thumb of various different male characters in the film,
yeah.
and it keeps kind of hopping from one to the other.
I think that's
All
important because it makes it differ from a lot of noir films. I mean, if you look at something like LA Confidential, which was, what was that, 97, or Zodiac in 2005. I don't remember when Zodiac came out. There's a running theme of kind of like, especially if there's multiple characters involved in the story, like there is in the case of Zodiac or LA Confidential, you're privy to kind of more information than they are as
Yeah.
individuals because you see the whole picture, which you do not get with Chinatown.
No.
Why wouldn't that be to the detriment though? Because I always think that part of the satisfaction of a noir film is piecing together the puzzle. Chinatown kind of doesn't give you the opportunity.
I don't think it's to the detriment, because it takes its time, and it holds its cards close to its chest until the right time to give you the next card.
Yeah.
It kind of strings you along on this mystery, which is really fascinating. But you could, if you had all the parts to it, if you had all the pieces, then you lose a lot of the intrigue and the drama of it. And also,
Yeah.
I guess the thing that I found watching it in preparation for this discussion was every time I watch it, I find more little bits and I pick up on more details that I hadn't noticed the first time.
It makes you feel smarter.
Yeah. So I think it has a huge rewatchability. Even if the first time you watch it, you're like, I don't know what's going on till the last half an
you
hour.
always notice more.
Yeah.
There are so many things that I didn't notice the first time watching it. The first time watching it, I'd totally forgotten about Curly.
Oh God, yeah.
Curly at the beginning of the movie, and they set up early on that Curly owes him money, and obviously that comes into play later on when he goes to see him, and he uses Curly to try and get Evelyn out of the state.
Yeah.
Basically saying to him, like, how would you like to pay off your debt to me another way? I think my favorite example is something really, really simple, which is, I don't specifically remember the setup for the scene. I think it's when Evelyn Mulwray has just said that the girl she's holding on to, the girl that's under her sort of quote unquote captivity, is her daughter. And this is before the big reveal, but they're in the car and he's just persuaded her to tell her who the girl is. And she sort of has like this emotional moment where she leans forward out of exasperation and rests her head on
the steering wheel.
And the car horn blares just a little, enough for you to know that obviously the mechanism's like very sensitive. And then later on at the very end, when that ending, we will get to that ending because that ending sort of makes the whole movie. She's shot dead by the spoiler alert. She's shot. If you haven't seen this, it was made in 1974. If you haven't seen this film, then that's
what have you been doing?
What have you been doing with that time? She is shot dead by the police, but you don't see it happen. The car just stops, and then you hear the horn. and your mind goes back to that moment in the car when she rests her head on the steering wheel, and you know instantly what's happened.
You hear the horn. The car rolls off into the night, into sort of into half obscurity, and you hear the horn, and
then the scream.
you expect it to stop, and it doesn't, and then you hear the scream, and then you see her with her eye blown out.
Who needs that eye anyway? What's depth perception?
Maybe she should be wearing bifocals.
That was a clever reference. Well done.
Thank you.
I'm gonna clap again. Yeah, it's full of little details, Chinatown. It's not just a very economical script, you know, these things about like Curly being introduced very early on and being brought back at the end, or the little detail with the car horn. That's an exercise in script economy. It's like some of the best uses of Chekhov's gun ever.
Oh yeah,
but don't even
subtlest.
know it's happening. Yeah. It's subtle. That's the thing. You don't even know it's happening. That's what makes it satisfying to rewatch. Whereas typically, you know, Chekhov's gun, there's a gun on the wall, and you see that gun, and your mind is instantly going to think that gun had better be used. Someone resting their head on a car horn, you think nothing of it. It just comes across as like a subtle little character moment. But I love the little tricks of the trade of being a PI. Like watching Chinatown makes you feel like, oh man, I could be a private investigator. Yeah. Like these little things, like he carries a box of fob watches in his glove box, and he will leave one underneath someone's car wheel, underneath the wheel of a parked car, so he can tell how long they've been there and stuff like that. It's clever. I
think my favorite part of that is also the kind of the truncatedness of it, where he does that to Hollis Mulwray, and one of the two men who works for him, when he talks about, oh well, he was there all night, he says, well, I had to go back 3 times for the watches. It's a clever idea and a nifty way of keeping tabs, same as the broken tail light, but also they had to go back 3 times to do it. There's a very kind of, it's very sort of homespun.
Yeah. But the thing is, it feels kind of clever and thrifty, and like he's resourceful. Jake Gittes is a very likable character.
Very much so.
Very likable protagonist. He has one of my favorite opening lines ever. Because the movie opens, it has a really, really clever opening, because the first thing you see is a very classic kind of 1940s style opening credits. And then the first thing you see is a black and white image, which again is like an homage to the movies like The Maltese Falcon. And of course, the presence of John Huston in the movie is as much an homage as anything else. For those who don't know, John Huston directed The Maltese Falcon, which is widely considered the very first film noir. But then it zooms out and you realise that it's a man holding black and white photographs. And it's pictures of this poor guy's wife bonking some dude, and he's making these little whimpering noises, and he throws them up in the air in sort of a fit of passion, and he wanders over to the blinds and grasps them in his hands, and our main character's opening line is, "You can't eat the Venetian blinds, Curly, I just had them installed on Wednesday." Like he really, you know instantly that this is a man who has lived long enough that any sense of empathy has sort of waned a little bit.
Well, he's seen a lot of things, and I guess
he's not unempathetic.
No, and more than Escobar.
Although Escobar has a moment at the end.
Yes.
But you get the impression that he's been around the block a couple times. This is definitely not the first time.
No, he knows the tricks of the trade.
Yeah. This is definitely not the first time he's had to kind of deal with this sort of case. The casting of Jack Nicholson is genius. He's so perfect. Because Jack Nicholson has that kind of streetwise thing about him, but also that kind of sarcasm.
It's the sort of slightly artful dodger kind of wise to people, but also you can still very much take him seriously.
Oh yeah. Some people don't. Like he's got a strange reputation in society, because it's almost like he's trying for like a movie star kind of image. He likes the publicity. He has an argument with a dude in the barber shop because he insults him for that very thing, you know, the idea that he comes across as kind of superficial. And the Venetian blinds as well, like it's just screams high class. Like he's trying to go for a certain kind of bourgeois image.
He's got them installed especially.
Yeah.
That I particularly remember the bit where when the news of Hollis Mulray's murder breaks, and he helps Evelyn. He sort of chivalrously, seemingly, sort of ushers her out to the car, and kind of he says, "Oh, I'll take you out to the car." And there's all these reporters in the entranceway, and he gets them to, he's like, clear the way, and sort of like helps her out. And then he turns back and tells them how his surname is spelt.
Yeah.
For when they report on it, it's 2 T's and an E.
It's very pulpy.
Yeah.
And he comes across as like he's trying to maintain a movie star image, which is of course dashed when his nose is disfigured.
He likes his nose. He likes breathing.
He likes breathing through it. And he spends the rest of the movie in a nose cast. It's morbidly funny. Like, the movie is not funny, but it's got these little things about it that when you look at it, it's kind of got this morbid sense of irony to it.
Yeah.
What about Evelyn Mulray? Because you talked about her a little bit, and how she's sort of introduced as though she's a femme fatale, and that's really important. And I don't think that can be her character cannot be considered in a vacuum.
No,
she needs to be considered in the breadth of the history of film noir.
And also, I guess, within Faye Dunaway's career, because the other thing that I particularly think about her for is Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Supergirl.
No.
Remember that?
Unfortunately, yes.
Remember Supergirl? That movie was great.
That is a chat for another day.
It's much better than Chinatown. That's for sure. Chinatown is pretty good, but like...
Is it Supergirl?
Well, like, I saw Supergirl before Chinatown, and the whole time I was watching Chinatown, I was just thinking, I'd much rather be watching Supergirl right now.
We could be watching Heat right now.
We could be watching Heat for £3. We could be watching Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. But anyway, carry on.
I think that came out in about the mid '60s, and there's a certain precedent for her playing a character who is not necessarily the good person. Nefarious.
Yeah. Not to mention the tropes of the genre. We and Jake Gillis are sort of expecting her to fulfill that role, and it's so obvious from early on that she's withholding information.
Absolutely. But also, I think this comes back to the value of rewatching it, because her performance in particular, I think it holds so many things that until you know stuff about her, it looks incriminating.
It's not like Kitty in The Killers. She's very. You almost imprint the femme fatale onto her, but when you rewatch, you realise that her performance, it betrays something of her vulnerability.
It's things like when Jake Gittes is talking about having gone to see Noah Cross, and she looks incredibly fragile, but until you're aware, I'm sort of leading to stuff we're probably going to talk about, but until you know the reasons behind that, it portrays something else. It
is really horrible, and I think there's only so far we can go without mentioning what it is that actually happened to her, and what the real mystery of the story is, which is that she is actually a victim. She is not the perpetrator of this great conspiracy. He confronts her because he finds what he believes to be Hollis Mulray's glasses in her pond, and the pond is salt water because it has certain fish in there that obviously can only survive in salt water. And salt water was found in Hollis Mulray's lungs, and he thinks that she killed him. And he's trying to get her to confess, and she does confess, but what she confesses is something very different and much more sinister.
It's pretty horrifying.
Which one of us are going to say it? Do you want to say it? Do you want to do the honours?
Sure. It's revealed that Noah Cross, who
her father,
is her father. That's revealed sort of at the midpoint of the story. Noah Cross was Hollis Mulray's partner. They ran the water. What do you call it? Water industry.
He is this baron. He's a water baron. He's got vast amounts of wealth and power.
And is sort of untouchable. And it's implied throughout the story that they do not have much of a relationship. She hesitates when referring to him as her father. She is clearly uncomfortable whenever he comes up in conversation.
Yeah.
And in the final act of the film, it's revealed that when she was 15, he raped her, and Hollis Mulwray's supposed girlfriend is in fact both her daughter, the daughter that they had together, and her sister.
And she says something to him like, "Is that too much for you to handle?" And it's really, I mean, that it's unlike anything I think I've seen in a film noir, with the exception of some of the more recent entries, which really delve into. I mean, something like Nocturnal Animals is gut wrenching.
I'd say it's very much a neo-noir style of reveal.
Yeah, I mean, Borden and Shomerton talk an awful lot about brutality, and they talk about the climate of film noir as a climate of malaise, and Chinatown takes it in a new direction. Chinatown, movies like Chinatown, you've got things like The French Connection in 1971. Serpico was 73, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Taxi Driver was 76. This new blend of noir was really unforgiving. It was not going to pull its punches. And I think Chinatown, there's one thing to having Travis Bickle shoot up a bunch of people in the end in like a brutal display of violence, but there's something really particularly? Oh no, I forgot to take my brain pills again. There's something very particularly appalling about the idea of a man raping his own daughter and her bearing his child. It's just grotesque.
I think it's made all the more horrifying by the way that the film culminates. The police shoot the wrong person. Well, are we talking about the ending or not yet?
Let's hold off on the ending. Let's hold off on the ending, because the ending is, I feel like we should end on the ending, because the ending is like, if you've never seen Chinatown, you at least know the last line of Chinatown, because it's so iconic. It's the thing that really bothers me, but also I think taps into something really cardinal about film noir, is what Noah Cross says to Jake Gittes when confronted about the fact that he did what he did, and he says to him something like, "You'd be surprised that if the conditions are right, any man is capable of just about anything."
Mm-hmm.
And it is that uncanny kind of feeling. Zizek made some comments on film noir where, its fascination, its preoccupation with criminality reveals something about who we are and like the dark side of us. We are the killers, And in that sense, when Noah Cross says that to him, you get this haunting kind of feeling that, does Noah Cross represent something really, really dark and insidious about all of us?
I think there's also a sense of a painful realization throughout the film of this kind of collective responsibility for Evelyn Mulwray's eventual death. I don't recall if it's Jake's colleagues or if it's Escobar, the people who he worked with in Chinatown, but when he talks about having tried to help a woman before and failed, there's a sense of sort of he's trying to do right by Evelyn for a seemingly a similar past mistake, and him and the institution, the police officers trying to solve the case of
quote unquote solve the case
of Hollis Mulwray's death, completely budge it. And
do they budge it, or is it deliberate? Is it slightly deliberate?
I mean,
that's the question.
Evelyn says herself, he owns the police.
He owns the police, yeah. And that's the importance. We'll talk about the ending a little later, but the last thing that Jake says in the entire movie is the line, "as little as possible." So this is just after Evelyn Mulwray has been shot to death, and Noah Cross has been allowed to get away with his crimes, and not just get away with his crimes, he gets away with the girl.
With Catherine.
With his daughter / granddaughter. And that is a reference to an earlier conversation he had with Evelyn, where she notes that he doesn't like to talk about his past. His past basically meaning Chinatown. The movie is called Chinatown, but it doesn't really take place in Chinatown. It takes place anywhere except at the end, like the very end of the movie. But Chinatown is his past. It is this looming present threat. I don't even know if that's the right way to put it. It's the past constantly pressing upon the frontal lobe of the present.
Yeah.
Where he used to be a cop in Chinatown. And when she asks him what he did, his answer to that is as little as possible. And in a line, it's basically saying, we took bribes to look the other way.
Mm-hmm.
We deliberately turned a blind eye so that criminals could get away with anything. So when Noah Cross gets away and he says under his breath as little as possible, it kind of begs the question, is it ineptitude on the police's part, or is there something a little more deliberate there, a little more corrupt?
Or a combination of both.
I mean, it could be. But the thing is, it's like him saying that line, I feel, sort of spurs something in Escobar, in his ex-partner, who's just arrested him. It spurs something in him to let him go.
To do him a favour.
Yeah, I'm doing you a favour.
Go home.
It's very sad. It's we talked earlier about how Escobar is kind of far less. He doesn't have the same kind of sense of underlying empathy that Jake has, and Jake might be a snarky little weasel at times, but he still has like a sense of right and wrong, which Escobar doesn't appear to have.
Also, he just seems to get emotionally invested in his cases, and when they're looking for Evelyn, Jake asks whether he can go into the house first, the quote unquote her house. It's actually Curly's house, because he wants a moment with her, and Escobar says, "You never learn, Jake." He gets too close, is the implication.
Yeah. It's such a good movie. It's so detailed and subtle, which is what has made it timeless. But
absolutely.
I guess you kind of need to ask the question, even though this movie is great and it has an exceptional screenplay, it is very, very detailed, it is very well paced, you never find your mind sort of drifting. We can't ignore the fact that it's directed by a monster. Yeah, I've received weird looks from people saying that this is one of my favorite movies. And in case you don't know, anyone who's potentially listening, all 8 of you, this movie is directed by Roman Polanski, who is a bit of a disgrace. He has been disgraced for, shall we say, unusual sexual activity involving individuals of an underage persuasion. He's a bona fide kitty fiddler. How do you reconcile the value of this film in light of that fact? Because I can't deny that this movie is an essential part of the film canon, and I can't deny that it's a great film.
I would say I think there are a few things to consider. Firstly, the film clearly doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a career of his that has often been filled with, unfortunately, with art imitating reality. There are themes in his films which mirror his own crimes.
Particularly the fate of Evelyn Mulwray.
Yes, I would say that this film, it is across his filmography, there are more contentious films, I think, than this for the depiction of that. I think with this film, it's by the time you finish the film, I know that you have a sort of is Evelyn someone to be trusted? Is she not? I think that we are under no illusions of who we are meant to side with. Noah Cross is the villain of the piece, and
he's a terrifying monster.
Terrifying, and Evelyn Mulwray is the victim. By the time that you're able to see it that way, you can see that from the very opening to the very end. If you look at the film just in isolation, I think it handles those themes incredibly respectfully, particularly for the time. I think it's surprisingly respectful and tasteful with the way that it handles some very complicated issues. I'd say also there's a difference between appreciating the film as a spectator and as the audience and consumer versus from an industry standpoint. I think that there's a big difference between somebody watching a film like this, who loves the film and or sort of say, I don't know, the Usual Suspects or something, and enjoys the film for the film itself, compared to an anniversary remastering of Manhattan that fills Cineworld cinemas up and down the country, and the sort of the industry side of it, or festival spaces endorsing the creators. I think that as individuals, I think this sort of...
Do you not think we're endorsing the creator by renting the movie on Amazon Prime?
Well, for my part, I have a copy that I got from Oxfam, so I like to think that I'm supporting I'm supporting that particular charity rather than giving him any money.
I think it's also important to establish that a film is not a one-man show. It's auteur theory is the dumbest thing maybe ever. Like even artists who are notorious for their kind of control over their projects, like, you know, Hayao Miyazaki. And I think Hayao Miyazaki, I think, is as close as you will ever get. Or say Kubrick. But Kubrick, what was Kubrick's cinematographer? The dude that you kept going back to. I've forgotten his name.
Yeah.
Or Miyazaki, you know, frequently employing Joe Hisaishi, and Joe Hisaishi's music is so
integral.
Important. Yeah, you know, I can't imagine Princess Mononoke without that score.
I mean, it's so integral that didn't Joe Hisaishi go back and reorchestrate ones that he hadn't done? So the entire canon has his music to it because it's so endemic to it. I'd say another one, if we're talking about just the people that the filmmakers who are generally described as auteurs, someone like Tarantino, he has used the same I cannot remember her name, which is awful and slightly undermines my point, but
we're awful just in general.
we're all Chinatown.
We are Chinatown.
Stunt double. He has used the same female stunt double for all of his films, and to his credit, he cites this woman in interviews and raves about her all the time, but as anybody else just doesn't focus on that. They just focus on him. And
that's not to discredit Tarantino. Obviously, he's a class act when it comes to making a movie. Like, his movies might be juvenile at times and kind of senseless at times, but the thing is, like, you still watch his movies and get the feeling that you're watching a movie and not something that came out of an industry conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Or someone like Shinichiro Watanabe is often heralded as being a bit of an auteur, but you know, if you look at something like Bebop, Yoko Kanno's score is essential, like overtly essential. The entire show is musical down to the name of the episodes.
Yeah.
Or I don't remember the name of the dude who did the character designs. He's essential. They brought the dude over who did like Mobile Suit Gundam to design all the tech. Like, film is a collaborative process.
It's a production. It's not one person at all.
It's not the same as one person writing a piece of music or one person writing a novel and having complete authorship over that novel. And if anything, like, the art of Chinatown is in the screenplay. So Absolutely. What about Robert Towne?
I'd say that the screenplay is one of the most commendable things about it. Didn't it win Best Original Screenplay at the Academy Awards in the year that The Godfather 2 dominated every single category?
I'm definitely not Googling it.
As I recall, it did win, yeah.
Yes, it did win. I know that off by heart, and I did not just Google it quietly.
Tap, 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 tap.
You couldn't hear me tap, could you?
No, I couldn't. You're fine.
It was very covert. But you couldn't hear me tap because I wasn't tapping.
No,
because I have just an amazing memory and I didn't have to Google it. That's a fact. And no one can prove otherwise.
But anyway, I think for everybody involved in this production, this is the absolute apex of their careers.
It is, isn't it? It's sad.
It's everybody in it. This is if not the best, one of the best things they ever did. And I think while I would question an organization giving this a new lease of life and a new release in cinemas, I would question that choice.
The ethics of it are so confused. But the thing is, I mean, like you said, this really is the apex of the careers of everyone involved. You know, The Pianist was very good, but Polanski, in my opinion, never outdid Chinatown.
No.
Jack Nicholson has had a slew of really impressive performances under his belt, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which came a little later, I think.
I think this was I think that was later in the 70s, maybe 78-ish.
I'm not Googling it. I'm not Googling it. It came out in 1975.
One so close.
So it came out a little later. You know, you've got things like About Schmidt was great.
The Shining.
The Shining.
Is that a reference to Treehouse of Horror?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Oh, that used to frighten me. That was.
Anyway, but even with that said, you know, the character of Jake Gittes is like, it's like reining him in. You know, and it's such a subtle, beautiful performance. It's so.
Absolutely.
You know, we just got done talking about Blade Runner and talking about how, in my opinion, the character of Rick Deckard is not nearly as boring and lifeless as people say he is. Because if you really pay attention, there's a lot of subtlety going on in terms of, you can see when he shoots that woman dead in the middle of the street, you can see that look in his eye, like a genuine sense of pathos. I think the character of Jake Gittes is the perfect example of that. It's like the most brilliant way that kind of character could be written, the slightly emotionally despondent, but at the very least kind of morally sure kind of character, which I guess you could say Deckard isn't, but
I mean, I assume also that where you meet him at the start of the story is fairly key. He's moved on to marital private eye work, keep catching infidelities in the act. He's moved on from what he used to do, and yet he still can get reeled in by it.
Yeah.
He still has a moral compass and wants to do right by people.
The weird thing about it is that in comparison to something like The Killers, The Maltese Falcon, Blade Runner even, those are all characters who have been broken. The Swede in The Killers literally gives up on his own life. He allows himself to be killed because he has nothing left.
No.
You look at Sam Spade. Again, like, his character is so unemotional, and the version of him that we get is so kind of like in control, but also completely devoid of any sense of emotion.
Yeah.
And then Rick Deckard, again, like, where we pick up on Rick Deckard in Blade Runner, his emotional armor has already dissolved. He's already been broken down. The thing with Chinatown is it's riding a line, because on one hand, that Jake Gittes has a past, and that past has damaged him. Yes. But actually, he's not in the same place that Rick Deckard is at the beginning of Blade Runner, or Ollie Anderson is at the beginning of The Killers. He, over the course of the movie, is destroyed.
I'd say that the end of the film would be the inciting incident to getting him to that point.
Yeah,
that's breaking point. And I guess starting him a little further back along that road is one of the things that makes it quite so heartbreaking by the time you get to the end.
The ending of Chinatown is haunting. It is haunting. And I've heard that originally the ending was going to be more positive, and they decided to change it because it just wasn't befitting of like the philosophy of the movie. But it's an important kind of ending. I think oftentimes a happy ending isn't actually earned. And of course you get to the ending and, Jake has employed Curly to try and smuggle Evelyn and her daughter / sister out of the state. He's hired Curly to try and smuggle them out of the state. And it all kind of culminates into this perfect storm of emotional horror when the police show up to arrest Jake. And they've arrested his two compadres, his two employees, and everyone's like talking over each other, and Noah Cross is there trying to reclaim his illegitimate daughter.
The last daughter that he's already disowned, Evelyn.
Yeah, and it's this perfect storm of just everything happening at once, and then Evelyn shoots Noah Cross in the arm, and then she drives away and she is shot to death. And the whole thing happens so like candidly. There's something really blunt about the way that whole sequence is filmed. It's all done sort of handheld, and it's got no music or anything. It's the way that everyone's talking over each other feels so like angry and passionate and real. But it is her death that is just the most like, it's almost emotionally exhausting to experience as a scene.
Like, well, I think you make a really good point about the pacing of it. I think when you that is very much juxtaposed with the rest of the film, which has this very, very slow burn. It takes its time. It feeds you little bits as it goes.
Dangling the carrot.
Yeah. It does not. It is a gradual process. It's very sort of slinking, and that last sequence is completely jarring as a result.
Yeah.
Everything comes to a head at exactly the same time, and nobody even has time to listen to each other.
Yeah.
Or to know where to look.
It's the only instance of the line "he owns the police" actually working. It's one of the most like generic lines ever. Way up there with you just don't get it, do you? You know, you could probably do a supercut of the number of times people say, he owns the police, but it works in this. It works.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think possibly because of the improvisational tone of that scene and the way it feels like it's really an event happening in real time.
Also, I think because of what that implication means to the rest of the film. You've
Yeah.
spent this entire thing watching Jake trying to bring the culprit of Hollis's death to justice, only to find out that that person is untouchable.
Yeah, and it is that feeling of a revelation that you almost weren't expecting. It's not like you aren't expecting it because it's unreasonable. It's because there are so many red herrings and so many kind of smoke screens that when that line is said, you totally believe it. It makes perfect sense, but for some reason it comes as like a shock to you. It reminds me of the ending of Red Riding, The Year of Our Lord, 1974.
Don't spoil it for me, please.
No, so it's 1974. Oh, you haven't seen it, have you? No.
I'm bracing myself to watch it.
Can I say a single line?
Yes.
All this over a bloody shopping mall. And when he says that line, you're just like, wait, what? I'm sorry, come again?
Well, now I definitely need to watch it. That's just reinforced it.
Yeah, the Red Riding trilogy is way up there. So Evelyn Mulwray gets shot in the head. And the way that sequence transpires is horrific. Like I said, you know, the car veers off into the distance, then it slowly comes to a stop. You hear the horn, then you hear this blood-curdling scream, and everyone rushes to the car, and you see the gash in Evelyn Mulwray's head, and her skull is just open, and it's horrific. And the prospect of Jake Gittes having just watched this woman that he loved get shot to death, and his reaction is painfully muted.
Yeah,
is what I would describe it as. It's the
numb.
sign. It reminds me of Porco Rosso. You know the bit in Porco Rosso when she tells Porco Marco that she's just found out her husband's died, and she feels nothing. She just says to him, "I've got no tears left to cry." It's like here's a bunch of characters who are so familiar with sorrow that they just don't feel it anymore. And you get the impression that's kind of where he gets to by the end of the movie. His emotional armor, I keep using that phrase, I can't think of a better phrase, but his emotional armor has been destroyed. And he just stands there just staring at this corpse.
Well, he's spent the entire film building himself up to stake his entire career, to potentially risk his entire career and livelihood for this woman, and
who he loves,
and for doing the right thing where nobody else will, and he watches it just die right before his eyes. Yeah,
you get a glimpse of Noah Cross taking Catherine away, and it's horrible. It's the way he puts his hand over her eyes
and tries to sort of pull her
away
up out of the car.
It's possessive and creepy. And John Huston, what a great performance.
Oh my God, find the girl.
He nails it. Like there's something about him that's just so utterly abhorrent to watch, that he nails that performance. He's really great.
It's even the fact that it's even little details like serving Jake the fish
with the head still
with the tail.
It's slightly barbaric and strange, but it also says something of his class.
He's the grand benefactor for this anti-Semitic retirement home.
Yeah, it's horrible. Which of course, you know, considering Roman Polanski, I think is of Jewish heritage, adds a kind of angle to that. But the movie almost doesn't give you an ending. It's like Blade Runner, you know, when Blade Runner ends and they just get in the lift and the doors close and it just ends, unless you're watching the theatrical cut, in which case, why would you do that? Please leave. You're not welcome here. But it's like, you know, Escobar turns around to him and lets him go. Like in that moment, the stigma kind of disappears for a little bit.
I think it's almost like when you watch it for the first time, you're expecting more. You're expecting there to be more of a chase.
I wasn't, but mainly because I think I knew that the legacy of that movie's ending kind of precedes it. And yet it is the most incredible ending of a movie, probably ever. You know, and he lets Jake go, and he lets Jake's two employees go.
And all that Jake can do is walk away.
And all he can do is walk away. You get the feeling that for all the tricks of the trade, all the little things with, busting the tail headlight of Evelyn's car so he can follow it in the night, and the thing with the fob watch under the car wheel, for all the little tricks of the trade, for all the wisdom that he might have, he's powerless. He doesn't have the power to
save her.
To save her. He doesn't have the power to square up against people with money and influence. And it says an awful lot about where the world was at, and arguably still is.
I was actually going to say another thing that I've been thinking about for reasons to justify viewing this film, despite a contentious name attached to it, is that I watching it this time that I just rewatched it, how prescient a lot of it still feels, and how important of a message I think it shows, even in the world going on for, is it 74? So that's
what would that be then?
50? I don't do maths.
That would be nearly 50 years. It's 46 years.
46 years later.
God, I hope that's right. Otherwise, I'm going to look like an absolute moron.
Hang on.
If I do, don't at me. I am also bad at maths.
74. That's 25, 30, 50.
46. Because if it were made in 1980 and we are now in 2020, that would be 40 years.
Can you cut this bit out?
No.
Okay. It's how many decades on, let's say.
It is insert number here. I'll just ADR a voice that very obviously isn't yours saying 46.
That cheesy line of "he owns the police." It's still, we've not learned from those mistakes. So often the people who need the help of the police are the people that are being persecuted, and Evelyn falls into that category in this film.
That last line, I love it. It almost feels cryptic, and I think it begs the question as to why the movie's called Chinatown, why the ending of the movie takes place in Chinatown, and Jake's two colleagues take him away, and he turns around to take one last look at the body, and his friend just says to him, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," and that's the last thing. It ends, and it's like it almost feels like resignation. That line, just forget about it. There's nothing you can do.
My own take on why it's called that is the various people on the police force who sort of retired from the force, like Jake. People in that world throughout the film, they talk about Chinatown like this bad place where backhanders happened and people got away with things who they shouldn't. And by the time you get to the end of the film, I think it's made clear that that's not an issue exclusive to Chinatown. It's endemic to the system. It's a systemic problem, and Chinatown is a microcosm of the whole issue. Just because
it is,
the film that closing sequence happens in Chinatown, but it goes far broader and deeper than that location.
So the moral of the story is 9/11 was an inside job.
Plan your crimes in Chinatown.
I always do.
Watch them do as little as possible.
I wouldn't dream of planning my crimes anywhere else. My Animal Crossing island is named Chinatown. And people really hate it. Like, I've invited a few strangers to my island for cataloging events, and people just hate it. They're really mean about my island. They don't understand how a person could look at this beautiful paradise, this blank canvas of a deserted island, and think to themselves, I'm going to model this after one of the most notoriously entropic urban locales in the Western world. Oh man, is there even anything else to say about Chinatown?
Lots, I think, but it's
there's a kind of fatalism to it, I think. And fatalism is something of a motif in noir. I mean, I keep mentioning The Killers. I really like The Killers. It's a really good movie. Go watch it. But The Killers is a really good example of that, where basically the story's over before it even began, because Ollie Anderson has been murdered, and that's what kickstarts the plot. So there's no saving him. He's already dead. there's a feeling of, I think Double Indemnity is the same. I think Chinatown has a similar sense of fatalism, not necessarily in the sense that the story is structured in a way where we already know what the ending is, but in the sense that Chinatown, it's also an analog for the past. Chinatown is his past, and the past will always catch up to you, and there's this feeling that this was doomed to happen. He was unable to save the other girl, and there's no way he's going to save Evelyn. There's like this feeling of fatalism, like there's nothing you can do. And I think that's another kind of sign of the importance of the ending taking place in Chinatown.
Absolutely.
Have you heard David Fincher's planning on doing a prequel series?
Really?
Yeah, called The Noah Cross Chronicles, starring Zendaya as Noah Cross. So I made that up.
I hate you.
No, the prequel series is really happening, but Zendaya's not in it, playing Noah Cross.
Is it really happening?
It is, yeah. And I don't know anything about it. I don't know if anything about it has actually been revealed. At this point, I don't even know if it will go through. But how do you feel about that?
I would rather that didn't happen, honestly. I'm not a fan of the culture of adding prequels to things that I don't think need prequels. I don't know.
Yeah, I think especially in this case, it doesn't really make sense, because part of the code of noir, I think, is that the past is an ever-looming present, but they are not happy about it. So they constantly hold the past at an arm's length. You get the same thing with Cowboy Bebop, where it's like it's deliberately very kind of cryptic about their past. It will give you little hints, but no more than that. And if they did a prequel series to Cowboy Bebop, it would sort of defeat the point a little.
Absolutely. I mean,
because it's not a story about the past; it's a story about the aftermath. They
are constantly running away from it and running towards it in one motion. The past is a foreign country, but also very relevant to where they are, and they can't forget it, even if they can leave it behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't you think David Fincher, like if anybody were capable of taking a story like this and making it as something good, don't you think David Fincher's the guy?
True. That does inspire a little bit more confidence. But Noah Cross, is that necessary?
I'm gonna withhold my kind of judgment until it is a thing that we can see. I guess all I can say is when they announced Blade Runner 2049, I was waiting for it to suck.
Yeah.
I was waiting for it to suck because I was like, they're doing what Stranger Things has made popular, and they are taking a movie from the 80s and they're doing a totally unnecessary sequel that no one asked for. And literally no one asked for a sequel to Blade Runner.
No.
Like literally no one. And if you're listening to this and you think that you did ask, you're lying to yourself and you're a disgrace. But it's, and then I saw Denis Villeneuve's. But then I saw Denis Villeneuve's name was attached to it, and all I could think of was just like Prisoners was a great neo-noir. It was a really competently done. Even Sicario, which I actually don't like. I don't think Sicario is the strongest movie. I think it's let down by a very lackluster script, but the direction of that movie is exceptional.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought, okay, maybe Blade Runner 2049 has a chance to be good. And not only did it have a chance to be good, it ended up actually being good. It developed upon the ideas of the original in a way that I think was just so befitting of that tone, and it didn't betray like the slow pace or the atmosphere of the original to be a more crowd-pleasing picture.
I think there's a real art and a knack to doing a remake or a prequel or a sequel, whatever, continuing a universe in some way, many years on, and staying faithful and referential to what it was, but also not riding on the coattails and doing enough by your own steam.
And it was the first movie that Harrison Ford has cared about, seemingly, in decades. He actually acted in this film. How weird is that? Harrison Ford acting? It's unheard of.
Who'd have thought it?
And they didn't.
It's more likely than you'd think.
They didn't even bring him back to to do a drunken voiceover.
No.
Because no one got it. But I almost consider it a blessing that movie was unsuccessful. Because it means they won't keep trying to do it.
Yeah.
But I think the same could be said of Chinatown. Like no one's thought about Chinatown in a long time, and I really like to think that the reason David Fincher wants to do this is because he has an actual idea. He's got a real.
Yeah.
And Mindhunter was exceptional. Mindhunter was really smooth.
Yeah.
So I'm cautiously optimistic, is what I'll say. David Fincher, he hasn't really let us down yet, has he? With the
No.
exception of what was it? Alien 3? Was that him?
Yeah.
I'm definitely not Googling
Yeah.
it. I'm not Googling it right now. That's not happening. I'm definitely not talking to cover up the sound of me typing.
Tap, 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 tap.
Yeah, it's David Fincher. Oh no.
Mm.
So David Fincher, like generally speaking, with the exception of a little stumble out the gate. I mean, I guess that wouldn't have been out the gate because he did that. When was the game? Was that released? I don't remember. Who cares? What I'm saying is David Fincher is obviously a very competent, very meticulous director.
Absolutely.
You know, so at the very least, it would be in safe hands.
Mm. You may have converted me. I may have come around on this idea a little bit because I think you're right. There's no market for more Chinatown content. There isn't a horde of people saying give us more Chinatown, give us more Jake.
Because of the bit in Stranger Things where someone references Chinatown. I hate Stranger Things. I hate it so much.
Oh, same.
I didn't hate the first season. The first season was pretty
The
neat, kind of tight.
yeah.
It was like a fan film, but it was a really nicely done kind of fan film. And then they kept going.
Aging them up.
They just kept going.
Mm.
And Finn Wolfhard makes me want to strangle him.
He's so annoying.
Yeah, he's just really irritating. And it's like, I don't even think it's necessarily his fault. Like, his character is horribly written. We're getting off topic. But the point is, like, it's not like you get the impression that Stranger Things kind of sung in like an obsession with that 80s nostalgia.
Absolutely, that it's the sort of the aestheticization. They call it the 3 decade rule, where films, it's the Back to the Future style of films from the 80s, looking back 3 decades to the 50s.
Chinatown is one of that. It's
Give
one
it,
of
give.
those kinds of movies.
Well, if that were the case, then we've already had our 30-year cycle.
We have, but I do like to think, I've got faith in David Fincher. David Fincher hasn't made a bad movie in a really
No.
long time.
I don't think it's pulled by demand. So hopefully it is pulled by genuine inspiration, as you suggested.
There's no hashtag Chinatown thing on Twitter.
Hashtag give us more.
Yeah, can't wait for the sequel. Oh.
Hashtag can't forget it, Jake.
Oh, Chinatown 2, Electric Boogaloo. It turns out that Evelyn Mulwray actually isn't dead. She faked her own death, and now she's got like a cyborg eye.
In the story of Jake, there's another film. I've not seen it. Have you?
It's called The Two Jakes.
Yeah, I've not watched it.
It's actually quite underrated. I put it up there with movies like The Exorcist 3, which are like, it's more to do with the fact they're attached to something else that gives them bad reception.
Yeah.
It was made, I think, in the 90s, The Two Jakes. I want to say 92, but I might be wrong. I'm not Googling it. 1990. I recalled that off the top of my head just now.
Just came to you.
It just came to me. Honestly, I'm incredible, is what we learned from today. Is that my memory is impenetrable. You could ask me anything. Please don't. Don't ask me about my mysterious past.
Grimsby?
We don't talk about Grimsby. What did I do in Grimsby? I did as little as possible. Get it? I did a reference. And a reference is the same thing as humor, and therefore it is funny.
We're back to Stranger Things again, are we?
I'm thinking more along the lines of Adam Sandler movies.
Pixels.
Oh.
Do you think if you say the name of an Adam Sandler movie 3 to 5 times, depending on whether you're referencing Beetlejuice or Candyman, he'll appear and ruin your day?
What about what about Bloody Mary?
Is that 3 times?
Oh, dude, I don't know.
A number of times.
I don't know anything about anything.
a prime number.
Anyway, yeah, The Two Jakes, I think is like a perfectly competently made noir. And I think it was obviously like Jack Nicholson loved playing this character and he wanted to play that character again. I think it's worth watching at least once. It's not going to have the staying power of Chinatown, but I really don't think anything could.
I was going to say it would be very hard to follow in the footsteps of that anyway. So long as it doesn't try and tries to do something different.
At the beginning, we made the very lofty claim, by we I mean I, made the very lofty claim that Chinatown is the best noir and possibly the best film ever made. What do you say to that?
I say I am hard pushed to think of a film that I get to the credits and I'm immediately ready to rewatch. I could put it on back to back to back to back. That's how engrossing it is. And I think for the pace and the length and the subject matters therein, you know, you spend most of the film learning about irrigation of land and the water wars in Los Angeles in the 1930s and things like that. It's I think it's incredibly well handled. And I think, again, I can think of few things that there is not a duff note to it. I don't think anyone involved in that production sets a foot wrong at
It's
any
literally
point.
perfect. It's a flawless movie.
I think if someone's moral sensibilities can justify watching a Roman Polanski film, and I do think that as an individual that is a personal
choice, yeah,
thing where you fall along that spectrum. But if you can, then it really is immaculate.
It's almost as good as Pixels.
It's almost as good. Almost.
Not quite. Like, it doesn't. When I was watching Chinatown, I was honestly disappointed with the lack of references to 80s pop culture.
I mean, I've always thought that the wedding singer is a character up there with Jake Gittes.
I like the wedding singer.
I didn't say I didn't.
How dare you bring the wedding singer into this?
It's just a funny comparison.
That's not an Adam Sandler movie. Adam Sandler's in it, but it's not like an Adam Sandler movie. It's not like he directed it or wrote it.
No. Okay. In which case, I think Jack and Jill.
You won't realise this, but we have something of a curse on this channel where we're always comparing terrible things to amazing things, and I feel filthy every time. Yeah, I did podcast with the wonderful YouTube channel Accounting for Games, and we compared Batman v Superman to Citizen Kane. We compared Zack Snyder to Alan Moore. I
mean, can you forget that iconic line, "Save Martha"? It's better than Rosebud.
It's better than Forget It, Jake, It's Chinatown.
Yeah.
I think the Chinatown would have been much better if it turned out that Noah Cross's mother was named Martha.
Mm.
And that would have been a much better twist. Or that Catherine was actually called Martha, and that was the twist.
Maybe that's what they were going for, and they ended up just...
They didn't have the confidence.
No.
I think. I honestly have no idea what we're talking about right now. I think that is that is a sign that we have exhausted not everything there is to say about Chinatown, but I feel like we've said enough.
One conversation's worth.
Regardless, it has been a joy to have you on here. I look forward to having you on here again to talk about your favorite movie of all time, Jack and Jill.
Jack and Jill. It's the film noir of our times.
The film noir of our times. And if we do have time in between talking about Jack and Jill, it would be lovely to talk about the Red Riding trilogy because that is wonderful. So we have that to look forward to. But until then, I hope you all have enjoyed listening to us embarrass ourselves. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us fail at basic maths.
You said you'd edit that out.
I won't. I won't. It's all right. No one. I have eight listeners. You've got nothing to worry about.
I don't know, butterfly effect.
Is that going to be the thing that ends up making me a YouTube sensation?
You step on 8 bugs.
Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed listening, and I have no idea how to end these things. Normally I just end them on a joke.
Is this my cue?